The topic of my speech is about dark media and what the online media has brought to the news business especially, and where it's going to go from here. So, just starting off with a basic definition. Media, as you know, is kind of the medium, or it's derived from the word membrane, which is like the layer that keeps some things out and lets some things in. And as one of my reporters recently wrote in a story today, newspapers used to be one of the most profitable businesses in the world. They used to post profit rates of 25, 30%. Newspaper owners were once very rich, influential, and feared. That's a picture of the young Rupert Murdoch. Looks a lot different now. But, and you know, the newspapers were the gatekeeper for information, you know, what the public should know about and what they shouldn't. And now the internet has really broken all that open. You see that, I think the recent information from Pew says that anybody who has, of the population that has a Facebook and Twitter account, which is almost everybody, 63% of people now are getting their news from Twitter and Facebook. They're not going directly to, you know, newspapers themselves. And a significant portion of my own two websites, Vancouver Observer and National Observer's traffic comes from Facebook. And actually, I think it's 75% now of National Observer comes from Facebook directly, or comes from Facebook referrals. And that means a lot of, you know, the lack of the gatekeeper means a lot of people are able to put all kinds of news online. That's a clip from the New York Times. Texas blogger's man crush on Putin leads to lengthy heart-to-heart. This guy was just a blogger who happens to love Vladimir Putin, and he got this extensive interview that other big media couldn't get. If anybody's watched the New York Times Page One documentary, there is a segment that talks about how WikiLeaks kind of bypassed all the main media and just dropped their explosive video about US military killing civilians and reporters in Iraq. They just put it on YouTube without going through the medium. And that is a clip from the Vancouver Observer. A posting on Facebook led to a story about how conservatives in the 2011 election hired Republicans to work on the ground in Ontario, which is illegal according to Canadian election law. And the reason why that, you know, Facebook post is relevant is because with the recent election, I think that anybody who is following it would know that multiple candidates from all the different parties had to resign or were kicked out from the race based on what they put up on social media, which makes, you know, some posts that they did, some Facebook or Twitter posts that they did back in 2008 was dredged up again, and as a result, they had to resign and quit. That has made message control incredibly important. You know, one of the things that struck me was that maybe like 10 years ago, editors would tell some reporters, like, you have to get a phone interview. No email allowed. You have to talk to them on the phone and ask questions. That's becoming increasingly rare. Some people will you call them up and they'll say, they might know the answer to your question, but they're saying, only email. They want it all on the record. They want it to go through multiple approval, I guess, processes. You know, those points are, you know, only 6 questions allowed. Everything goes through central communications. Some of these are things that we experienced during the reporting of the campaign itself as well. And one story that I heard, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that when a reporter asked the federal government a very basic question about algae, like it was called rock snot, basically this kind of type of algae, it led to the question to go through 16 different federal communication officers just to arrive at an approved answer that was ready to release to the public. And, you know, sorry, this is just a story that we did about how limited media access most reporters had during the campaign. And when I mentioned that more and more people are getting their news from the internet, it can be both a great and a terrible thing. I remember reading an article by the editor of Der Spiegel, it's a German magazine, talking about how newspapers will never die. Newspapers and magazines will never die because people need them to access stories and viewpoints that you would never come across organically. They've been curated. You stumble upon topics that you didn't really care about before. You stumble upon viewpoints, and then you change your mind on a certain issue. But now, with the majority of people getting their news from Facebook or their friends, or the sites that they liked, this is, again, I should note that this is just my personal view. It's not, it hasn't gone through, it's not like the official position of my organization or anything like that. But I find, I'm not sure about you, but I find increasingly there seems to be, I noticed it a lot during the campaign, but this kind of parallel reality happening where people are discussing the exact same person or the exact same issue, but it's like two completely separate views that have no, there's no middle ground. There's a lot of extremes, and news stories are often used to reinforce a certain existing narrative, like Muslim refugees are dangerous or carbon tax will destroy the economy. And there was a thing that happened. There was a story that came up about a man in October who was yelled at by his neighbor because he said he was voting Liberal, and a woman yelled at him that said, are you crazy? If you elect Trudeau, then he's going to implement Sharia law, like Islamic law, and Canada will be completely destroyed. And I was like, what? How do these stories? Where do people are getting this information from somewhere? Where is that coming from? And this is just a comment from the Rebel, which is one of the many news sites out there. But there's a thing about if Canada becoming a socialist utopia governed by Sharia law and all that. These kind of voices exist, and as a result, it can lead to some negative consequences on the ground. As for this one Liberal candidate from Lebanon, and especially with the recent Paris attacks, I found that a lot of news can be used. News can be used to clarify, but it can also be used to push a certain point of view. There was an incident in which, in Turkey, right after the Paris attacks, where the Turkish fans were asked to have a moment of silence for the victims of terror in Paris. And there's a video of there's allegedly a video of Muslim fans shouting Allahu Akbar and shouting and whistling during that moment of silence. But the story on the left side shows that actually it was a little bit more nuanced than that. They weren't just, a lot of them were shouting in Turkish the phrase, martyrs will never die, the nation will never be divided, which is more to protest ISIS or IS. And they were also angry at the fact that while the world was mourning the attacks in Paris, when 102 people died of terror attacks in Ankara, Turkey, basically the world's response was pretty silent. So there's a lot of nuance, but depending on what kind of news you decide to look at, a lot of it can be used to reinforce stereotypes, to polarize viewpoints, and dialogue becomes really difficult. And now with the proliferation of news, you might have remembered something like there was a video that was going pretty viral about used by pro-life advocates depicting what looked like to be a very gruesome kind of abortion process. But it was later revealed that this video was spliced together from footage that had nothing to do with it. It was probably more of a miscarriage. But even after sites like The Guardian or other news websites debunk this kind of thing, if you do a Google search, there's lots and lots of news sites that will say well, this video was real after all, and it's just that shows that when there's too many, when there's a proliferation of voices out there, it's both a good thing and a dangerous thing, because pretty much for any point of view that you have, whether it's like the world is going to end in 2012 or whatever viewpoint it is, probably there's some kind of site that's out there that'll support that. And the big question is about like who is going to control the future of the news. Newspapers around Canada and worldwide are increasingly in trouble. So who is going to publish the news that people are going to read from now on? And based on what little information I have, it seems that increasingly that's Google, Facebook, Apple, and Yahoo are going to be the gatekeepers of what you get to see and what you don't. Twitter, you might have heard, is already hiring reporters, and there's a lot of online journalists today who kind of are their own brand, and you follow the news that they report, regardless of which organization they're doing that for. And governments, to a large degree, if you're living in China or you're living in some country where the state produces all the news, then already and controls the social media as well. Already, you're in a position where you can only hear what the state wants you to hear. And how to combat that? It feels to me like it's to just consume a lot of different news sources from different regions, different languages if you can, and try to, again, come to an informed opinion. The thing that's really scary is that people read the news to come to an informed opinion, but it can get really confusing when it's unclear what's real and what's not. These are just graphics that show the present statistics of the news media. The one in the left, the right-hand corner, bottom right, is from Newspapers Canada, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have, and thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. It blows my mind where we get our information from and how we consume it, and then how we pass that along as well, right? How we edit it. It's like the game of telephone, right? Or Chinese whispers or whatever. Do we have any questions at all for Jenny? Okay.
Just one thing I think you missed as well is the attacks on public broadcasters. So CBC funding cuts. The BBC is being really attacked by Conservatives right now, in Australia as well. So I think that's another thing that's really scary in the future, that those public broadcasters might not exist in the same way.
That's really true, yeah. It's things might move in a different direction now, but in Canada, but I don't know what's going to happen with the UK and BBC. Yeah.
I don't know what's happening in the UK either. I left 7 years ago. Okay. Yeah.
More of a comment, but sure. I think that the comparison always with newspaper, old media, and new media, it misses the point, which is you can read the exact same text on one or on the other, but I think that's where technology companies have really failed the public. We have created a medium that rewards slogans, that rewards, like if you post something very long on Facebook, for example, it takes people a long time to read it, and then you don't start getting the clicks immediately, so that post is not considered popular. So we are creating, I don't think it's a problem of the outlets themselves or of the reporters themselves, but the media that we have created with the internet in particular. I think that's where, in general, Silicon Valley has completely failed the public in the way that it's programmed.
Yeah, it's called the attention economy, and it's very, very, it's like rock and wood in a way. It's a way that it's affected the news industry over. The way that has affected the news industry over the last several years is that, you see sites like BBC News starting to change their tone in some of their stories to sound more like Vice. You see CNN not saying anything when Donald Trump basically posted a neo-Nazi infographic because they have to get eyeballs. And it's like it's not about telling stories that are true anymore. It's about telling stories that people are going to read. And I think that has done tremendous damage to what used to be a very separate industry, was the news industry. But, especially in the dawn of the social media age, I see the news industry like we've become part of the entertainment industry.
True, like the Pizza Rat, for example. Like who would have predicted that like major news sites were going to post a video about the Pizza Rat?
That was awesome.
Right? But
Jen, congratulations and fabulous work with The Observer. It's an amazing piece of writing that they create amazing content. So thank you for for that usually to do. What do you think of Vice and Huffington Post coming up now in the world?
No, they're really, really coming up. Especially like, I mean,
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it's really, really coming up. We were just looking at, in our own spare time, the newspaper companies and who's making money, who's not. And Vice is like, by a long shot, making like the most through their partnerships with like various companies like Coca-Cola and what have you. And then Rupert Murdoch has invested in them and everything. I don't know. Like right now, Vice maintains a really edgy, tone. And I think that's what people buy them, go to their site for. And Huffington Post, I'll admit, like I feel that they kind of do a lot of everything. I find it really heartening that Le Monde and various other various other news sites also partner with Huffington Post and get a lot of stories out there. There's a beautiful, beautiful series about the mothers of ISIS fighters, like Western people who have gone to fight for ISIS and things like that. And that can only be done with huge budgets. But I don't know at what point the corporate sponsors and advertisers are going to decide to draw a line and say, you can't report that. What do you think?
Okay, it's a deeply contentious subject. Okay, one more question at the back. Can you shout?
Yeah, probably. You had an earlier slide about the newspapers making money back in the day and how much they did. And originally, I think the original market driver for newspaper was that I would pay money and I would get information, and it wasn't ad driven, and that information came to me. Even though we now know it was biased, but probably more like propaganda by government bias, but it wasn't corporate bias. And now it's shifted to this model, just like you said, even Vice has got advertising driving it, and when it's like a line. So on some level, do you think the news industry and just what, the state or whatever you want to call that, has kind of shot itself in the foot by always relying on ad-driven content as opposed to looking for paid? Like if I knew I was paid a lot of money, but I knew I was going to get like super high quality reporting with never biased and no restriction on by corporations, would I pay for that?
Yeah, no, that's a really thoughtful question. I think that part of there was like a study about how many Canadians, especially like people under 30, are willing to pay for news, and it's like zero, pretty much, like, even lower than the US. Anyways, I'll make this very quick. But there is kind of a third way in which people sign agreements and say, look, I'm going to give you or there's Kickstarter, we did Kickstarter, but anyways, they could say I'm going to give you X dollars for funding, but we have no say in the story. We don't get to control who you talk to, et cetera. So, but anyways, we can talk more about that later. I see.
Everyone, Jenny Uechi, thank you very much.